This is a production of Cornell University.
Really delighted to see so many of you be here today and to have the alumni group join the Wine Librarians Association for this presentation by Jim Trezise. For many of you, I'm sure that Jim does not need much of a introduction, and I'm not going to give him too much of an introduction. I'll let him speak for himself. But as the president of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation since 1985, Jim has been an incredibly strong advocate for wine and grapes in New York. I have been only involved in the wine and grape industry as a librarian for about the last 10 years, but in my experience I know of no one who is a stronger advocate, who is willing to try many different things to promote wine and grapes from New York and from the East and the wine and grape industry in general. But he has the chutzpah that he's willing to take the New York wines to tastings in California and things like that. So he is definitely a very strong advocate. So, Jim, welcome. This is a pointer,
okay,
and then this is forward on the right and backward on the left.
Great. Okay.
Should just be able to point it to that.
Great. Thank you, Marty, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. I think Marty was too generous in his introduction. I'm just a wine guy, happen to love the stuff, and so I have the right job, and I can't complain about that. And I was delighted before this presentation to hear one from Missouri, because as Marty said, I go to California quite a bit to show off New York wines, and in fact, I have to catch a very early flight tomorrow to do that for the next 3 days, and another person with me is going to be there showing off Missouri wines. So we're very proud, and Missouri's making great wines these days. There are certain types, French-American hybrids like Céval and Vignoles, where Missouri is king, bar none. Plus, their signature grape, Norton, and they have a wonderful website called nortonsays.com, which is very nice and playful, and I'm a big fan of Missouri wines as well. So thank you for your presentation. I'm delighted to tell you a little bit about what's been going on in the New York wine industry and to kind of get out a crystal ball as well about what we see as the future. When Marty asked me to talk about the future of the industry, I said, you got to be kidding. I mean, who can predict it? But I suppose we do have some indications from the past 25 years in particular as to where we're headed, and barring some real catastrophes, I think that we're basically going up and away, which is the title of my talk, and I'll finish that off at the end. But what I wanted to do is start a little bit with who we are. I'm privileged to be the president of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. It's a not-for-profit organization that was created in 1985 during a crisis in the New York grape and wine industry. Literally, this industry was about to go down the tubes. Vineyards were being abandoned, wineries were being shuttered, tourists were flocking away from the regions because they were just so ugly and unattractive. And the state of New York realized through our constant pleading that this was too important an industry to let go. And so they partnered with our industry and created several major pieces of legislation, including one that created the New York Wine and Grape Foundation as a private, not-for-profit organization. We're not government, we're a private organization. We partner very closely with the state, but we have a private sector board of directors, and our functions are promotion and research. And one of our major partners, so important for the improved quality of our wines and recognition, has been Cornell University, including the Geneva Experiment Station. World-class researchers and cooperative extension have really helped us to get where we are today. We represent the entire state. I am delighted to be based in the Finger Lakes region, which to me is absolute paradise. I live a couple lakes over on Keuka Lake, but we represent the wineries on Long Island, the Hudson Valley, the Niagara Escarpment, and Lake Erie, as well as the Finger Lakes. And now there are wineries literally all over the state, in the Thousand Islands, You know, who would ever thought that far north? But there's a really burgeoning wine industry in the Thousand Islands, and it's growing all over the place. Since our creation in 1985, we have become nationally recognized for our innovative programs and for the partnership we have with the state of New York. And I wish I could take the credit that Marty lavished upon me, but the key to this has been partnerships. It's been a whole bunch of people working together. Cornell University, the grape growers who refused to give up, the wineries who invested their dreams and their money in the future, and many others as well. And my sermon for the past 25 years is diversity is our strength, unity is our power. We're all different, we're different regions, we grow different grapes, we have different philosophies, and that's all fine, we're all right. The major thing is when we go to Albany, our state capital, and talk with legislators or the media, that we're all singing the same song. So if there's one contribution that perhaps I've made to the industry, it's that sermon. The results in the economic impact, which I'm going to go through very briefly so we can take a look going into the future, are that from a state of true economic crisis in the early 1980s, we have now become the fastest growing agriculture in the number one and number two sectors of New York's economy, believe it or not, agriculture and tourism. We're the fastest growing agricultural industry. And remember, wine is farming. You think it's this wonderful beverage in a bottle, and sure it is that. But first and foremost, wine is farming. And right now, we're entering the most exciting period of the year, which is when, after a year's worth of work, the grapes are going to start being harvested and to go into the tanks. So we're number one in agriculture, and also we're number one in terms of growth in the tourism sector as well. And that has not been lost on the state of New York. This is a little propaganda that's on our website, and our website is newyorkwines.org. Don't try to read it, and I'm not going to read it to you. But the graphic says, what's in a bottle of wine? And the whole idea behind this graphic is on the left-hand side, you see a whole bunch of things, you know, starting with what is it, vineyard land and a whole bunch of other things all the way down, bottles and transportation, advertising, and so forth. Those are all the things that you need to make a bottle of wine. It doesn't just grow on trees. You have to have all of those inputs. And when you buy that land and when you buy those labels, somebody else is taking a cut besides the businesses that are getting your dollar directly. And who takes the cut? Government. Federal government, state government, local government. There are things called taxes. Anybody know what taxes are? They take taxes out of basically every transaction. So as you're going to see, we end up generating a huge amount of taxes for the state of New York. This graphic says what's in a bottle of wine, $6 billion. Now, $6 billion is the sum total of what the wine, grape juice industry worldwide contributes to the state economy of New York. Of that $6 billion, New York alone is $3.4 billion. So our little industry, and it's tiny compared with California. California is 90% of all grapes and wine in the United States. New York and Washington each are about 3%, and the others combined are the other 4%. We're tiny compared with California, and yet we generate $3.4 billion every year for New York State's economy, and that's something that we don't let the legislators forget. This is, we commissioned two studies in 2004, and they came out in 2005, and all of this is on our website. We got a huge amount of data that you might be interested in on our website under the category called Information Station. And this just gives some of the statistics in terms of the economic impact of our industry, the $3.4 billion that I talked about. You know, it's 28,000 jobs, it's 786 million in wages and so forth. And I want to stress that this is the total impact. This is the direct impact, it's the indirect impact, and the induced impact. It sounds like funny money, but it's not. This was a study done by the world's foremost wine economics firm in Napa Valley called MKF Research. And the methodology that they used was one that the Federal Reserve Bank uses and the United States Department of Agriculture uses that measures the total impact of an industry. So obviously we have a lot of impact on the state economy, including the taxes paid, which very conservatively is $372 million a year. This is just a larger version, still unreadable, of what was on the other a slide that I showed you before. And this is based on a different study. The one that I just showed you was a snapshot of 1 year. It was how much was the economic impact that we produced in 2004, and so therefore it's much greater now than it was in 2004. These results, and I can email anybody this PowerPoint if you'd like, give me your card later or send Marty an email. Basically what this did is it measured the growth over a period of 18 years. From 1985, when the New York Wine and Grape Foundation was created, until 2004, when we measured the statistics and reported them in 2005. And what it showed is that, as an example, for tourism, the number of tourist visits to wineries in 1985 was about 340,000. In 2004, it was 4.1 million. So it increased by 12-fold in those 18 years. That's more than 50% a year. The number of employees, the revenues, the sales, everything else basically went up, up, and up. And since the government takes a piece of the action, whatever we do, it went up for them as well. These charts you can't see too well, but the farm winery, it shows how public policy, how laws have stimulated the growth of our industry and also industries across the country. It's exciting how Missouri is growing and how Nebraska and Iowa and these other states, Florida, you wouldn't think of these states as wine-growing states, but wine is now growing in all 50 states. And what this chart shows you is the left-hand top chart is two pieces of legislation. First, the Farm Winery Act of 1976, which made it economically feasible to have a small winery in New York State. You didn't have to have a big winery. You could have a small winery, and the reason is you could sell directly to consumers. Before, you had to sell to a middleman at half price, and you just couldn't stay in business. So after that happened, basically there was a surge in the number of wineries that started up in the next 10 years. Then, so from 1976 to 1984, we grew from 15 up to 36, so a doubling of the number of wineries. Then after the New York Wine and Grape Foundation was created and a few other pieces of legislation were enacted in 1985, you see that huge bar to the right, which is the growth in the wineries since then. And again, this is very outdated data. It would probably be a third higher than it is now in terms of what you see, because the growth has accelerated over a period of time. And then the one to the right is just a variation on that. And then the one at the bottom is really for our wonderful politicians in Albany, that shows that the wine industry truly is statewide. It extends from our easternmost county, Suffolk County on Long Island, all the way to our western border with Pennsylvania and Chautauqua. And we now have vineyards or wineries in 34 of the 62 counties we have in New York State. So therefore, a majority of counties and a majority of legislators now have wineries. This is an interesting chart because in New York there are two types of winery license. There's what we call winery, just winery. Some people refer to them as commercial winery. And the other is farm winery. A farm winery must be located on a farm. A commercial winery can be located in a city. But the major difference is in the amount of production. If you have a farm winery, you can make only up to 150,000 gallons. If you go over that, you're automatically a commercial winery. So what it shows is that the commercial wineries are only 20% of the licenses, but they're 95% of the production. The farm wineries, the ones you visited last night like Fox Run and tonight Sheldrake Point, the farm wineries are 79% of the licenses, but only 5% of the production. Both of them are very, very important in their own way. The commercial wineries are the ones that buy the vast majority of grapes that are grown in New York State, and we're the third largest grape producing state in the country. The farm wineries are the ones that really attract the attention and the crowds and the visitors, so they're really the generators of sales taxes in particular. And this just it shows how wine production has increased since 1985 in both the commercial and the farm winery sectors. But again, you can see the lighter shade at the top is the production of the farm wineries, and the other one is the commercial wineries, which again, both of them are very important in their own right. And I mentioned tourism. Yes?
Are the commercial wineries distributed around the state just like the graph that showed, I mean, where are the most of the commercial wineries?
We're going to get to that about where they're distributed, but basically commercial wineries, and I'll give you an example. We in New York have the world's largest wine company. Do you know that? It's called Constellation Brands. And it's headquartered in Fairport, New York, near Rochester. But it has wineries not only in New York, but in California, Australia, Germany, Italy, you name it, they have a winery there. And they're great partners, great supporters of our organization. They are literally distributed worldwide. The other commercial wineries, Bully Hill is another one. They probably have distribution in 30 to 40 states, and a couple of the other commercial ones as well, but not as much as Constellation does. So in terms of tourism, people visiting the wineries, these are visits rather than visitors. And I stress that because usually when people are visiting wine country, they go to 2 or 3 wineries in a day, not just one. So this isn't the number of people. There is no way we could measure that. This is the number of visits that the wineries collectively had. But in any case, in 1985, it went from 384,000 in 2003 to over 4.1 million, and now that's probably up to about 4.5 million because that's pretty old data at this point. Also, what's happened is the tourism was accelerating, so that in the 3 years between 2000 and 2003, the number of visits increased by 54%, and the sales per visitor, meaning that the wineries are doing a better job selling the wine, or the wines are getting better, or people are getting thirstier, but something's going on where people are buying more wine when they visit. And the bottom line is that in those 3 years, we doubled the total amount of sales at the wineries, which again means double the excise taxes and double the sales taxes for the state of New York and for the counties as well. And this is just a slide showing that you know, the take by the governments has gone up just as the wineries have grown as well. And this is just a breakdown by region. You can see that the bluest or green on the screen to the bottom, that's the Finger Lakes. And the Finger Lakes is the largest wine region. The Greater Finger Lakes is actually larger than the state of New Jersey, believe it or not. But the wine industry is pretty much concentrated around 4 major lakes. We're on one right now, Cayuga Lake, then further to the west, Seneca, then Keuka, where I live, and then Canandaigua. However, Canisius now has a couple wineries, Skinny Atlas has a couple wineries, and again, it's spreading out more. And also, the Finger Lakes is just one of the most beautiful regions in the world, period, and people are catching on to that. And the wineries of the Finger Lakes are very, very cooperative with one another. I talked about unity being our strength. They have glommed onto that. They understand that if they cooperate, they're going to bring more people to the region. It's going to be a bigger pie, and everybody can get a bigger piece of the pie rather than trying to cannibalize each other's market share. So the Finger Lakes has something very, very special in terms of the attitude of the wineries, which doesn't exist to the same extent in the other regions. Place of origin, and this is again something that's important to our legislators. We obviously attract a lot of New Yorkers because they're relatively near, but we also attract people from other states and other countries as well. More and more the international visitors are coming from Europe and Asia as well, and wanting to visit our wine country. Now here's where we get into the sales and distribution. And you can see once again that the preponderance of the wines that are produced in New York, which really means Constellation Brands and the other larger wineries, most of them are distributed out of state. Whereas most of the small wineries, like you see around here, they are distributed, first of all, right out their own door, which is the best sale they can make, or within the regional restaurants and wine stores. And some of them, as they grow larger, they get into the wholesale network as well. Let me explain the economics behind that. If I have a winery, which I don't, and I sell you a $10 bottle of wine at my winery, I keep the $10. I can do whatever I want. I can take a vacation. I can reinvest it in the winery, but it's my $10. I don't have to share it with anybody. If I want a restaurant or a wine store to sell that same $10 bottle of wine, I have to sell it to them for $6.67. So it's a third off for me in terms of my take. If I sell it to a wholesaler who's much broader in terms of their distribution and can reach many, many more outlets, then I have to sell it for $5. So the economics is something that's very important in terms of the size of the winery, and that's why a lot of the wineries start small, like 5,000, then 10,000 gallons, and then they have to make a decision, where do they want to go? Do they want to keep selling everything out of their back door, which is the most profitable, or do they want to take the leap into that very competitive marketplace where there are thousands of brands competing for shelf space and restaurant wine lists? And again, this just illustrates what I've been talking about. The small wineries comprising Wine Trail sell most of their wines within New York State, and a lot of them right in the regions where they are. And many of them sell them right at the winery, because again, that's the most profitable thing. And the other thing that does, if you can get people to come to the winery, you're building an audience, you're building a clientele, you're building brand loyalty, so that when they go back to New York City or Rochester or Syracuse or Niagara Falls, they're going to say, they're going into their restaurant or their wine store and saying, hey, do you have the wine from Hunt Country Vineyards or Glenora Wine Cellars or Fox Run or Sheldrake Point or what have you? And so the on-premise sales at the winery are very, very important. And again, this is just, it has more to do about distribution. And then this is something that the legislators pay attention to as well, is that the wineries are really a value-added component of the economy, because when they make an investment, it's big-time money. They have to build a new warehouse. They have to buy specialized equipment that costs a lot of money. And the average winery that responded to our survey a couple years ago invested $500,000 over the 3 years in various areas of their operation, whether it's in the vineyard or in the winery itself or building a new warehouse or tasting facility. So let's take a look at the future. And anybody familiar with the SWOT analysis? You know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. These are just things that I jotted down in terms of my own thinking about where we may be headed. And it could be good news, which I think it's going to be, or it could be bad news. And it really depends more on external circumstances than the internal circumstances within our industry. So let me start with the strengths. First of all, geography. You know, we do have a good climate across New York State. Yes, once in a while we'll have a disastrous year, and once in a while we'll have a bad year, but by and large we have a good climate for growing grapes of all types. And what we have found out through research at Cornell, through trial and error by the producers, is if you plant the right grapes at the right site, in the right soil, then year in and year out you're going to have a good quality crop that you can use to make good quality wine. And by the way, one of the really exciting projects that's almost done now that Cornell's been doing for us, relative to the climate and soil characteristics, is a satellite-based map of New York State, acre by acre by acre. It's going to be color-coded. It's going to be based on 40 years of temperature data, soil types and everything like that, and it basically can tell you on a website where you can plant different types of grapes, where you can't, and where you'd be a total fool if you even tried. And that's going to be available, and there are total fools, believe me. They don't last very long, but they try it. Another thing that's a strength of ours in the Finger Lakes, I want to specify, is the cost structure. This is not true of Long Island or the Hudson Valley. They're too close to New York City. And let me give you an example of cost structure, what I'm talking about. If you want to start a vineyard, you want to start a winery, you've got to have the land. The land in the Finger Lakes suitable for growing good grapes is anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 an acre. On Long Island, it's $50,000 to $70,000 an acre. In Sonoma County, California, it's $75,000 to $80,000. In Napa, if you can find it, it's $250,000 an acre. So we have a cost structure here that actually has lured some very, very prominent Californians. There's a revered grape grower named Robert Young, one of the best grape growers in California, and his family bought 100 acres on Seneca Lake several years ago, which he's having one of the local grape growers and wineries manage for him. And so we are getting some Californians now who are going east instead of us going west. And then finally, market access. This is both good news and bad news. We happen to have one of the most thirsty markets for wine in the world, which is New York City, but it's also one of the most competitive. Everybody wants to be in New York City. It's also the port of entry for most foreign wines coming into this country. There is no loyalty among New York City people for New York wines. If anything, it's reverse discrimination. If it's local, it can't be true. And I don't mean to offend anybody here from New York City, but no, we have found that to be true. And in fact, we have a program specifically aimed at New York City throughout the whole month of October called New York Wines and Dines, which I'll describe in a minute. Anyway, the market's there. We keep knocking on the door, and there are our upstate markets like Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo that are much more loyal because in part the consumers get out to the wineries and they have that wine country experience. They get to know the winemakers and they build that brand loyalty. So it's good. It's good news and bad news, but it's not easy. Marketing wine is not an automatic thing by any means. We also have had a very dramatic growth, and it's accelerating, and it's likely to keep going, again, unless some macro things in the economy change, which we're kind of fearing right now that they may. Quality. Yes?
About growth, I mean, is there, growth in terms of number of wineries, or, I mean, is there going to be market saturation at some point in terms of...
Could everybody hear the question? Yeah. It's a very good question, and I would say that even at our current rate of growth in the Finger Lakes, we won't saturate until another 10 years or so. We've got 100 wineries in the Finger Lakes now. We could easily accommodate 200 to 250 without people even noticing it in terms of crowd. Napa Valley has 300 wineries. Napa Valley itself is as large as Seneca Lake. Seneca Lake has 50. And so there's a lot of room in the Finger Lakes in particular. Long Island's getting crowded. They have a space problem. Hudson Valley, it's not so much a space problem. There are other geographical areas.
You talk about accommodating. You talk accommodating in terms of agriculture, or accommodating in terms of like actually being able to be successful and make money?
Both. Both, because what happens, you would think that Napa Valley would be going downhill with all those wineries and the traffic jams and so forth. And it's a beautiful place. I like it, don't get me wrong. But it is very different from the Finger Lakes, which is still rural. If the wineries get into it in a good way, and if they continue cooperating the way they have now, what they've seen is the more wineries there are, the more attention the region gets and the more people come here. So at some point you'd probably reach a saturation point, but I think we're probably a long ways off from that in the Finger Lakes. So I think the growth is likely. The quality, again, Cornell I will bring into this, the research that they have done and the cooperative extension agents who get the research to the people who need it, the grape growers and the winemakers. That is such a vital part of the growth of our industry in terms of the reputation that we now have internationally. My day job is to promote New York wines. I've also volunteered a year's worth of weekends to head a new group called the International Riesling Foundation, which has a board of directors of people from the top Riesling producers from around the world. And I can tell you that people from Germany, people from Alsace, people from Washington State, which produces great Rieslings, they all know that the Finger Lakes is one of the premier Riesling producing regions in the world, and we have respect for that quality. Unity I mentioned before, which is cooperation, coordination, and communication, and as long as we keep that, and it's not an automatic, you have to keep working at it all the time, as long as we keep that, then there's nothing that's going to stop us. Weaknesses, education and training. And I mean that not so much in terms of viticulture and enology, and I'm very happy to say that thanks to Dean Susan Henry of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, over the past couple of years, Cornell has started a 4-year undergraduate program in viticulture and enology. Really, really exciting. Because before now, the people who wanted to enter our industry had to go out to California, to Davis or Fresno or one of the institutions out there. And now we have it right here at Cornell, which is really, really great. But even before that, the research and extension and all the conferences that we would have at Geneva, we had a good educational system for the technical parts of our industry, for the grape growing and the winemaking, because of all the research done by Cornell. What I mean by a weakness in education and training has much more to do with marketing and sales. And probably the most successful wine industry in the world these days is Australia. They really have their act together. Not only do they make good wines, but they long ago did a strategic plan that had some extremely ambitious goals that they exceeded in a quarter of the time that they gave themselves because they worked together. A lot of the people working in the tasting rooms, instead of being part-time students or something, they have master's degrees in wine marketing and that kind of thing. We haven't had that in New York, and that's one of the things that our organization is focusing on now, especially in the specialized area of marketing our wines in New York City. So education training kind of segues into marketing, which was my second point. Distribution. And this is not just New York, this is all across the country. The small wineries in Missouri and Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York, everywhere, have a big, big problem, which is the traditional distribution system of wine in this country. When Prohibition was repealed in 1934, it had to be repealed by a constitutional amendment, the 21st Amendment. And it's a very short amendment. Part A says the 18th Amendment is hereby repealed, and Part B, in effect, says we, the federal government, now leave it up to the states as to what on earth to do about alcohol. And so they punted. And so all 50 states has a different system. Missouri's is different from New York's, different from Vermont. Go across the border to Vermont, you can buy wine in grocery stores, as you can in 37 other states. New York, you have to buy it in one of 2,500 liquor stores serving a population of 18 million people. You know, it's absolutely crazy. You have different tax structures, different bureaucracies. And what the 21st Amendment mandated until 2 years ago was that if you wanted to sell your wine, if I wanted to sell my wine in Missouri, only way I could do it is to hook up with a wholesaler, therefore sell my wine for half price. That's the only way I could do it. Now, thanks to a Supreme Court decision in 2005, we can ship wine directly into those states that allow it, which is almost all states, not quite, it's probably 42, 43 at this point that allow it. So now the small wineries in these states, if they have a consumer in another state that wants to buy their wine, there are a lot of checks and balances in terms of legality and proof of age and that kind of thing, but they can ship that. Nevertheless, the distribution system is still very much stacked against the smaller wineries in the country. Yes?
Does New York have any dry counties?
Yes, there are a few dry counties, believe it or not, in New York, and we just don't pay any attention. So, you know, what's the law? Anyway, and then the last weakness, I'll say, is the size of the business. And most of these are family farms. A lot of them in the Finger Lakes, they're people who came from the soil. They were farmers first. They grew grapes, and the quick history of this industry, when I came here in 1982 and the industry was fading away, it was because of a big restructuring that was taking place. It used to be that there were 4 or 5 giant wineries, Taylor Wine Company, Gold Seal Vineyards, Great Western Winery, Widmer Wine Cellars, Manischewitz, 5 or 6 giants, Royal Kedem in the Hudson Valley, and that's about all you had. You had a few small wineries, but you had these big wineries, and they bought the grapes from all these grape growers. And then there were corporate turnovers. The Taylor family sold to Coca-Cola, who sold to Seagram's, and all of a sudden everything changed. And that's why the Farm Winery Act of 1976 was so important, because a lot of these grape growers wanted to stay in the wine business, but they didn't want to lose their shirts. So they lost their shirts opening a winery instead. But at least they had control over the final product, the quality of the final product and also the marketing of the final product. And so it was really the crisis that stimulated the Farm Winery Act. In recent years, we've had more people come from other professions in the Finger Lakes. Nevertheless, most of these operations truly are small family farms, and they really have very limited resources. And winemaking is not a way to make money. One of my favorite winemakers, John Martini from Anthony Road, he says a winery is a black hole for dreams and money. And there's an old California adage that if you want to make a small fortune, you start with a large fortune and get into the wine business. So it's really, You know, people think it's romantic, but you know, what's romantic about having to prune vines in February with a, you know, wind coming through the vineyard? So anyway, so the size of the business is, it makes it very, very challenging because you've got to deal with a huge amount of regulation on both the federal and the state levels. You have, and that's regulation beyond employment regulation and, you know, regular taxes and that kind of thing. It's very, very challenging, and as we all say in this industry, you got to love it. And fortunately, most of the people do, because there's very, very little turnover. The people in this industry, to me, are the real treasure because they're very committed to it, and they're really just fundamentally good people. Yes?
I hope I'm not continuing to annoy you, but
No.
Going back to distribution question.
Yes.
Even though the Supreme Court ruled just, 2 years ago in favor of the lack of the middleman, why when you go on the wine trail can people from Pennsylvania not get wine shipped to them?
Because Pennsylvania is one of those states that basically makes it virtually impossible.
Repeat the question.
She was asking if the Supreme Court ruled in 2005 that it's okay to do direct shipment, why can't people in Pennsylvania get wine shipped directly to them? What the Supreme Court ruled, by the way, and the Supreme Court cannot make laws, it interprets laws, and even the Congress, unless they did another constitutional amendment, they can't change the fact that every state still has control over that system. So what the Supreme Court did is it forced every state to look at its laws. So New York, what do you want to do? Because before that decision, New York wineries could ship wine directly to New York consumers, but California wineries could not to New York consumers. And so that was unfair. And we couldn't ship to Virginia. So there was just this mishmash. So there was a flurry of legislation after the Supreme Court decision. And so Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is still one of those states that is very backward in that particular area. Sorry, Pennsylvanians. My kids were born in Pennsylvania. I love it, but not about wine. Okay, so opportunities. Overall growth in the wine market. We are slowly but surely becoming a wine-consuming nation. We're catching up to the rest of the world. And it's really about time because wine is good for your health. Wine in moderation on a daily basis with food has been proven over and over again in studies, medical and scientific studies around the world. It has so many health benefits, it's unbelievable, and people are really glomming onto that. But the overall growth in the wine market is due partly because of that realization, but also because we have a new generation, I'm happy to say, of my kids and kids their age, kids in their 20s. They're the kids of the boomers. There's the boomers, and then there's what we call the millennials, which are the kids in the 20s. And the millennials are really taking to wine, incredibly so. And they don't have any prejudices. They prefer wine to beer. They prefer wine to spirits. They want to try different wines, different tastes, and so forth. So it's really provided great opportunities, especially for us oddball states, that people haven't heard of before, that we can get into the minds of these young people. The growth of Riesling worldwide. Riesling is now the fastest growing white wine in the United States, believe it or not, and second only to Pinot Noir, which is growing fast mostly because of that crazy movie called Sideways. But don't go there. It's not. Don't drink that stuff. Anyway. Anyway, Riesling, it's phenomenal. We've been waiting for it to happen for a very, very long time, and it is. It's grown in the past couple of years by about 28%, and it's going through the roof. That's why we created this International Riesling Foundation, because there's a wave out there, and we want to catch the wave. We're not sure why it came about, but one of the reasons is because Riesling really reflects what the French call terroir, meaning where does it come from? It really reflects the soil that it's grown in, and the slate and the schist and all this other stuff. So you can tell a German Riesling from an Australian or Finger Lakes Riesling or what have you. You can tell a Riesling from the west side of Seneca Lake from the east side, just based on the climate and the soil. So that's one thing. But mostly because it's the most food-friendly wine that there is. You can have Riesling, comes in several styles. It's bone dry to sweet. And so you can pair Riesling with almost any food that you can imagine, and it's also great as a sipping wine. And so the Riesling, actually, that also leads into our international reputation for quality. It's not exclusively Riesling, but that's been our signature grape, and that's the one that's giving us the reputation that we want. We also in New York continue to have a diversity of grapes in wine. We're not just a cookie cutter. We don't just make Riesling. We also make some wonderful Concord that we used to be famous for before, and there's still a big market for that. Catawba, Céval, Vignoles, new varieties developed by Cornell like Velvet Muscat, which are very promising. Traminette is a really nice grape and wine that other states do a great job with as well. And New York probably has a greater diversity of grapes and wine than almost any other state or country, because we started historically with the Native American varieties, Concord, Catawba, Niagara, very fruity, very aromatic. And some people love that. Other people say, it doesn't taste like wine to me. So we say, fine. Then go to the next level. Go to the French-American hybrids, the Céval and Vignoles, that grow well like the Labrusca varieties, but also have taste characteristics that are more like European wines that you might be used to. And then in the 50s, two European pioneers, Charles Fournier from France and Dr. Constantin Frank from the Ukraine, they came over and proved the skeptics wrong. They proved that in this climate here in the Finger Lakes, which can get cold, that you can grow the classic vinifera European grapes like Riesling and Chardonnay and Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in this climate, and you can make good wines from it. So we have all three species, and within those species a whole bunch of different grape varieties. So basically we have a taste for everyone. The Locavore movement. Now in the case of wine I call it Locapore. And Locavore basically means this whole idea of encouraging people to eat food that's grown or raised or whatever within 100 miles of where they live. You know, look to your neighbor. Don't, get stuck. Don't get apples from South Africa. Get apples from New York. And there's really a big trend for that going around all around the country, and that's good for us. And there's a trend even in the wine business as well. People are more interested in local wines, which again is why we call it the Locapore. And then gas prices. Now, how could gas prices be, an opportunity? Basically, it could be an opportunity, and has been to a certain extent, until you reach $4. It's been an opportunity here because more and more people are saying, well, I don't have to go all the way to Napa Valley to have a wine country experience. I can go to the Finger Lakes. I can hop in my car, and I can get one tank of gas and take a bunch of friends and have a wonderful weekend in this beautiful wine country called the Finger Lakes. And that has helped us up until the $4 mark. Okay. What are the threats? Gas prices, okay, and as they go down, it's fine, but, gas takes away disposable income, and let's face it, wine is not a necessity. It's a wonderful part of life, it's a great pleasure and so forth, but it's not food in terms of the nourishment that we need in our bodies. So if there's something that can go, wine is one of those things that can go. We haven't seen that yet, and what we've seen is that the people who are now coming to the wineries, maybe fewer people, but they're buying more when they get there. So they seem to have a mission. A weakened economy, you've read the newspaper, I'm sure, Lehman Brothers and everything else, and we're actually experiencing that direct right now in New York City. I was talking with a guy today who's running our program for October. And the way our program works, it's called New York Wines and Dines, is we get about 50 to 70 top New York City restaurants throughout the whole month of October to feature New York wines with New York foods in their New York restaurants. So that the special in all of these great restaurants, when a customer goes in, they say the special this month is New York cuisine. New York wines, New York foods. Here's the special menu. We have our regular menu too and our regular wine list, but here's the special. And they don't have to pay anything to be in the program. They get a lot of free publicity and so forth. Nevertheless, this year it's been harder to get people to sign up than the past because of the economy. People are afraid. They don't want to buy anything. They don't want to buy any more wine. They're just going to get rid of the stock that they have. The restaurants are suffering tremendously, and so that does absolutely have an effect. Decreased state support, that also could have an effect on us because I mentioned the partnership with the state of New York over the past 25 years. It has been crucial to the rebound of our industry, which has been crucial to fueling the state of New York with more jobs and investment in taxes as well. But given what's happening on Wall Street, New York's economy is not looking really good for next year. So the budget that we get, the matching funds from the state that we get, are most likely to go down. That means less research, it means less promotion and other things as well. Continuing over-regulation. As I said, we're regulated on both the federal and the state levels. The federal regulation is not bad. Actually, the Tax and Trade Bureau is very enlightened, very responsive, and so forth. Unfortunately, the New York State Liquor Authority is not. It's really a horrible agency for us to deal with. It takes forever to get a decision. When you get it, it's the wrong decision. You have to appeal it and so forth. And it really is a threat to the continuing growth of our industry. I was on a wine grape task force that the governor put together, and a bunch of people from the wine industry were, and one of the goals that we set forth was to have the industry double in size within 10 years. And we can do that. We can make that. But not if the State Liquor Authority keeps holding up the licenses and that kind of thing as well. So end of that sermon. And then the neo-prohibition movement. This is not as serious as it was 15, 20 years ago, but there still are people out there, including the World Health Organization, who simply want to ban alcohol, period. You know, alcohol is bad in any form, under any circumstances, in any amount, and so forth. And so we still have to be very vigilant about that and make sure that they don't get too far. So what's the bottom line? You know, my crystal ball says up, up, and away. I see further growth, probably if the economy straightens out, accelerating growth. And I think we have a long way to go to reach our full potential. I see a blue sky with a few clouds, and we're just watching the clouds very closely. So that's it, and I thank you very much for listening. I don't know if you have time.
Thank you very much, Jim. We do have time for a few questions.
This summer, I saw in the wine press that Native American wine did pretty well out on the West Coast in a couple of cases. Would you comment on that?
I sure will, with pleasure. You get the wine press, huh?
Sure.
Well, good. The wine press, if anyone wants to get the wine press, it's a weekly blurb I do every weekend. And it's free, and it's very bothersome. But anyway, you can get it for free. Just email Bonita, B-O-N-I-T-A, Hampton, H-A-M-P-T-O-N, Bonita Hampton at nywgf.org. Stands for New York Wine Grape Foundation. Bonita Hampton at nywgf.org, or give me a card and I'll write that on the back of it. But anyway, no, it's kind of fun. I do get a lot of feedback. It goes to 4,000 people around the world. But the gentleman was referring to Native American grapes doing well in California competitions, and I love it. I judge in about a dozen competitions a year, most of them on the West Coast. And my friend Hudson Cattell also is a judge at a number of competitions, including ours. And what's fun, the reason I'm a judge out there is I'm kind of the token Easterner. So I can tell my friends from California when they're going to taste a catawba, what should they be looking for? What should it smell like? What should it look like? What should it taste like? You know, what should they think about, and so forth. This is before they taste it. I would not influence their opinions even if I could, and I can't. But I'm kind of the educator about these weird wines, is what they call them. And the funny thing is that they really want to be on my panel, because it's not just Chardonnay. You know, it's the weird wines, and they want to taste the funny things. So there are several wineries in New York, Swedish Hill being one of them in particular, and Goose Watch, its sister winery. They make a very wide variety of wines from all different types of grapes. And they make a diamond, which is just sensational, and which won a gold medal and I think best of show 3 years ago at Riverside International Wine Competition. There are Concords, Catawbas that do extremely well in these competitions in California. And I'd love to claim all the credit for educating all these people about that, but in fact, there are several people in California, Californians, who also have been saying to their fellow judges, don't be a viticultural racist. You know, the quality of the wine doesn't depend on the species of the grape. The quality of the wine depends on the quality of the fruit and what the winemaker does with that fruit. Do they preserve the fruit of it and so forth? So we really now have a huge group of judges, most of them from California, who are much more open-minded now. And so our Native American varieties often do extremely well. Yes?
Well, I know that the Snow Goose at Goose Watch won a major California competition over 900. And again,
yes.
how do they determine a best to show when it's such a wine, it's like a semi-sweet wine, it's so different than what they're, used to trying? I mean, how do they go in since you do this, how do you determine that that's going to be a best to show?
I could spend a half hour on it. Yeah, and the question was how do wine competitions determine the best wine in the competition, or at least the best white wine and so forth. And I could actually, for anybody who wants the detailed response, I can email you a special edition of the Wine Press that I did on that. But basically how a wine competition works, let's say the one that you're talking about where, was it Goose Watches?
Yes.
Snow Goose, which is a neat blend of 2 or 3 different grape varieties. Right here in the Finger Lakes, won the best white wine of about 1,000 white wines from all over the world. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, you name it, from Australia, California. It's the best single white wine out of 1,000. How does that happen? Basically, you have a large group of judges that are divided up into panels of 4. Okay, 4 people who taste on the first day. All the wines are divided up. Everybody doesn't taste every wine, because if there's 2,000 in a competition, it's going to take you a long time to do that. And typically we'll taste 120 to 150 a day. So they divide up the wines to these panels, and the panels then say, okay, this wine deserves a gold, a silver, a bronze, or no award. And they have to come to a consensus on that. And so that's how the medals are awarded. Then, and if everybody on a panel says it's a gold, then it's what we call a double gold. And so the double golds, then they go to the sweepstakes round, which is the last morning of the competition. So you have maybe 60 wines, and so you have 30 of the best white wines and 30 of the best red wines and so forth. And then you have all of the judges taste all of the best wines. So the first one is sort of a process of elimination, but for the big awards, you have all of the judges tasting all the wines that are left. And it's a very legitimate thing. It's called blind tasting. We have no idea when we're tasting the wines whose they are, where they come from. We don't know if they're from California. We certainly would never know the brand. You can sometimes tell, Riesling, for example, if you're experienced, you can tell an Australian style from a German style or something like that, but you certainly wouldn't know the brand. And also the other thing is that we don't swallow. We spit. If you have 120 wines a day, you're not going to last very long. So, but no, wine competitions are very legitimate, and I've learned a lot, and I've been doing it, let's say 10 for 20 years, so that's 200 wine competitions times however many wines. And so I've tasted a lot of wines, and I never get sick of it because I learn something every time, and the reason that you have a panel instead of one person is because everybody tastes different. A wine's going to taste different to you than it does to me, and maybe we'll both like it, but for different reasons. And so there's discussion about, why is this a good wine, or what food would it go with, and so forth. So wine competitions, we have on our website a section called New York Gold that lists all the gold medal wines from the wine competitions. It's a great shopping list. Yes, sir.
I was up at Long Point Winery on the east side of Cayuga recently, and they have a Merlot up there that's actually made with California grapes.
Yes.
That they import. And I was just wondering if you could comment on the prevalence of wineries in the region using other grapes and maybe the advantages and disadvantages.
Okay, there's a winery, Long Point on Cayuga Lake, that uses, for some of its wines, California grapes, like Merlot from perhaps Lodi or some region out there. And how prevalent is that, and so forth. First of all, it's perfectly legal. If you're licensed as a farm winery, you must use all New York fruit. However, if for any reason you want to use grapes or juice or wine from another part of the world, then you simply register as a commercial winery, and then you can mix anything that you would like. Some wineries will, like Long Point, they have a mixture. They have some New York wines, and they import some juice from California to make their Merlot, and they actually have, what was it, a Zinfandel, I think, which we don't grow in New York. So if you see Zinfandel, you know it's not New York-grown grapes. There aren't that many wineries that do that. Mostly because the fruit that we grow in the Finger Lakes is such good quality. But there are certain varieties, if there's a shortage of them and they want to go to other states to get it, that's fine. The exception is when we have a weather disaster like we did have in 2004 and 2005. We had very severe winters that reduced the crop, especially of Riesling, very, very significantly. And it becomes a dilemma because after you've spent a lot of time and effort marketing your wines, getting them on wine lists in restaurants, getting them the shelf space in the wine stores, you have to keep that shelf space. So you have to have wine. And if you go a year without producing it and you lose the shelf space, you've got to start all over again in terms of marketing. So even the people who are totally loyal to New York and prefer to source New York fruit, if the fruit's not there, you have to do something. And so we were able to get a law passed that says that if there's a weather disaster that reduces the crop of a particular variety by 40% or more, as determined by the Commissioner of Agriculture, then the farm wineries can buy from out of state without changing their license.
But in this case, it's not the same wine.
I'm sorry?
In this case, it's not the same wine because it's different grape. You know, are you going to call it the same name or?
No, you have to label it. The labeling regulations are federal from the TTB. So no, it's you know, if you read the label, it's always accurate. Yeah. No, and in that case, now you can, according to federal regulations, which is what New York follows, if you want to, you can have up to 25% of out-of-state grapes in. Well, it's got to be 75% New York grapes, even if you're a commercial winery. But no, it's very heavily regulated by the federal government.